I think we've lost the art of learning how to appreciate a musical reference, or just a reference in general in modern media. The reason why could be many things, just the idea of the modern internet being a lot more fast-paced without you actually kind of digesting or analyzing anything you see is probably a pretty big contributing factor to that. In my case, before becoming a YouTuber and a guy who covers primarily a lot of JoJo's but engages himself with a lot of different media behind the screen, I tend to like to get into an author's mindset and really try to figure out why a creator or a group of creators made the specific media they did. And the best way to do that is to look at their references and what they used to craft their current art or media. Hirohiko Araki says that all of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a hymn to humanity. But then the question devolves into, well, what makes up humanity? And I think, well, a pretty integral part to that, second to probably a few other things, would be music itself. Music, right next to its sister art, is integral to the human condition, either through its storytelling traditions, relaxing, a way to vent frustration and anger, or a way to show your love. Music is part of humanity. So using it as a building reference to making characters or whole plots is a great way to emphasize your thesis in a story about humanity. So in this video, I'll be talking about some of my favorite musical references within JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and showing you some that you don't even know about, or making possible connections that make stories of JoJo's even better than they once were. Trust me, it gets a bit crazy once you start to connect all the dots. And by the end of this video, I hope you enjoy just references in general when it comes to your favorite media or art, because without it, maybe you're not truly loving the media or the art you're really engaging with. And oh, by the way, hello, my name is Metas. Walk with me. So where do we begin? Well, let's do the obvious one. Let's talk about Dio and Ronnie James Dio and how this character and this artist have influenced basically all of JoJo's. I'm not kidding you, there's like 5 song references I need to talk about, maybe if not more than I'm actually forgetting about. I'm not joking, there is a lot here. So let's talk about the obvious reference with the song Holy Diver. Now the song can be summarized in a multitude of different ways, as the interpretation can flux depending on how you see it. It could either be the Holy Diver talking to himself, the Holy Diver, or Dio talking to the Holy Diver, that being a priest, or the priest himself talking to the Holy Diver. Regardless of who is talking to who, the song can be more or less summarized as a reflection of oneself or somebody reflecting on you. So you can ultimately determine this song having multiple meanings within JoJo, whether or not this is Dio talking to himself within his head, or later on with Dio talking to Pucci, with also having the possibility that Holy Diver the song being later referenced in part 6 with the Heaven Plan. However, it doesn't end there. The name or title of Holy Diver is of course inspiration for the stand The World, as the world looks like a diver, and the holy part comes from Dio, who is an inverse of holy because he is kind of like an antichrist-like figure, or you translate his literal name Dio into God, so Holy Diver. However, looking at the lyrics of Holy Diver reveal that there are some references to future characters, as this album was released before part 1. So Holy Diver in its entirety might be the inspiration for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure as a whole, not just Dio and Pucci and the world. Funny enough, this idea was one of my first YouTube videos, so it's fun coming back to this fan theory. And yes, I still believe in it wholeheartedly because it's just too perfect. Like the whole Shining Diamond, cat references, steel references within the song are just clear, obvious notations for future parts. I want to clarify something here as well. I don't think Holy Diver inspired Dio. I think actually that's a wholly different song. A year after the album Holy Diver was released, Last in Line, the next studio album by Dio, would be released, and there is a specific song within this album that I think matches Dio wholeheartedly a lot better, that being Egypt, The Chains Are On. The song describes a pre-Egypt before authority comes in and enslaves them. My interpretation of the song for a very long time was the early Israelites or Hebrews finding their holy land and then being enslaved by the Pharaoh or possibly Rome. However, Dio himself, when describing the song, seems to be describing a pre-Egypt civilization that eventually gets controlled by the Pharaoh. So we're talking first dynasty type stuff. So this is an ancient song or an ancient time being described. How all of this goes back into Dio, and maybe even the Joestars, is the fact that Dio is an invader. This is described in literally the first chapter of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. The Joestars have fame, money, and power in early part 1, a land of milk and honey described in the song. Then comes along Dio, who wants all of that for himself. He is the invader. And later on within part 1, Dio describes a fate between him and Jonathan that might be preordained because of gravity. So you could ultimately see the chains being put on the slaves within the song being the chains of fate being put on the Joestars, being always interconnected with Dio for a very, very long time, till the final battle between Jolene and Pucci. These two songs inspired the earlier parts. However, they are also used again to continue the story moving on forward from part 3. In retrospect, as JoJo's was originally only supposed to be 3 parts, especially Jotaro's, as conceptually Jotaro is the first Joestar. So what song inspired him or his journey? Well, I think that is actually The Last in Line, a song that is in the album with Egypt, The Chains Are On. In this song, it describes a hero or heroes going off to fight a witch, which they might never come home from. They are the last in line in terms of defense against this great evil, with specific lines that might inspire the Stardust Crusaders group in its entirety. Might be a little far-fetched, but I think it's there. However, though, with these earlier song references or building blocks, I don't think they necessarily fit in with Araki's modern use of song references. It's more like he listens to these songs, catches an idea, then refines them into a character. Case in point, Dio, Pucci, Jotaro, etc. Or in lamer cases, takes a song name or a band name and then applies it to a character with no real meaning behind it. Up until part 4, where everything drastically changes. It's no longer listening to a song, catching an idea, then refining it into a character at its best. Now it's listening to a whole song or album, transforming the themes and ideas of said song or album into a character. Not refining, turning into. That said character then would eventually clash with other themes or opposite themes with other characters who follow the same path. Sometimes doubling that twice over to fulfill a character. Not necessarily for their theme, but for their design. And probably still to this day, the greatest example of that is Josuke Higashikata and Yoshikage Kira. Protector, destroyer. Selflessness versus selfishness. Possibly to this day, the best dichotomy between two characters. And that all comes from the ideas of their song references and their overall themes and meanings. So yes, this is power scaling Pink Floyd versus Queen, if you want to think about it like that. And technically Prince and David Bowie too? Okay, to make sense of it, look at it like this. Josuke represents a protector. How this comes through Pink Floyd and Prince is that the song in specific is Shine On You Crazy Diamond by Pink Floyd, represented through Crazy Diamond, obvious name reference there, in which the song is about how Pink Floyd, the band, is showing an homage or a love for Syd Barrett, one of their previous bandmates who became a rampant drug abuser who suffered through a lot of mental health issues over the course of many years, just changed physically and literally as a person. While he helped the band itself become super popular and well beloved around the world, he could never help himself because of the rampant drug abuse and mental health issues, and eventually later on would pass away because of it. How that's transferred into Crazy Diamond and Josuke is the fact that Josuke can heal everybody around him but himself. The biggest case example of that is when he loses his grandfather and then therefore becomes the protector of Morio. But showing the Prince half of Josuke's character reveals a lot about him. Josuke is outspoken. He loves to show his personality the same way Prince did. While Prince was a man, he was a man who definitely broke a lot of gender norms and really challenged the status quo, whether that was through his music, his love of fashion, or his general ideas overall. Of course, this plays into Josuke's character. Josuke, design-wise, is overly complicated and having a lot of buttons and pins and text all over his school uniform, while simultaneously having a pretty old hairstyle that's kind of out of date, however, is now somehow, at least in Josuke's case, a little bit progressive or forward-moving, mixed in with his new fashion. He's not a character who hides himself. He loves what he loves. So when you look at Josuke's character in his totality, with these songs included, he's a very progressive, self-loving character who doubles as a protector for the place that he loves. And while I think you would understand that on a first read or reread, I think if you actually try to understand it from Araki's point of view, I think you'll learn how to appreciate the art that Araki is trying to convey through his medium of manga primarily, and of course the anime as well, just through the song references alone. And while in a vacuum Josuke's character character can be cool, in practice without a foil, he seems kind of bland. However, we have Yoshikage Kira, and this is where things get a bit crazy because, well, it's a bit of a lie that Yoshikage Kira wants to live a quiet life because his song references are nothing but loud, and his design references are just sad and depressing. Killer Queen, Sheer Heart Attack, and Another One Bites the Dust are all hyper-violent, hypersexual songs that are up in your face and are loud about it. Killer Queen is about a woman with a crazy amount of lust that will drive you wild, with the implication that she might kill you? Question mark on that one? Depending on how you view it. But is still a high-class lady, or a woman that presents herself in the high class. Of course, this ties back into Yoshikage Kira's crazy-ass lust for hands, and trying to present himself in a certain way, just like the Killer Queen. With the next being Sheer Heart Attack, is what I would say if Sheer Heart Attack actually made sense. Like I said at the beginning of the video, music references do matter in JoJo's because they don't only lead you to the meaning of said character, but also leads you down the route of how Araki was making the story during the time as well. Because Yoshikage Kira was supposed to have a sympathetic backstory, or a possible sympathetic backstory, quoting from Araki. However, he didn't want to do that. So the Sheer Heart Attack reference kind of gets lost in the removal of story bits that we never saw. Sheer Heart Attack is about how teenage life can go by fast, or moves fast in retrospect, while simultaneously being pretty confusing, being similar to a heart attack and how fast and sudden it can be. And similar to Yoshikage Kira, that's kind of how his life was, very sudden and fast until he became an adult when both of his parents died. However, though, they are not good parents because they either ignored him or coddled him too much, likely leading to his weird depravity as an adult man. Without this backstory, you can see Sheer Heart Attack's meaning or reference as the fact that Kira lives a pretty hard and fast life while simultaneously being quiet. However, with the pseudo-canon-esque backstory that you are kind of required to read to actually understand the song references, or just understanding Kira as a character, ties in with his rough teenage years and childhood. And coming to the final song reference, that being Another One Bites the Dust, this one's actually way easier to understand. Song-wise, the meaning here is just a conflict between two people where one gets hyper-aggressive and just starts sliming everybody out. Mag dump the whole bitch. Now, applying this simple meaning to Yoshikage Kira, it basically goes the same way. Kira, once he reaches his full power with Bites the Dust, feels more confident and more chill than ever just to kill anybody who gets in his way when it comes to his depravity, taking hands from pretty women. You could argue at this climax he's no longer a serial killer but just a plain old murderer, taking out people left and right. But Kira is supposed to be a silent killer, at least for a majority of the story. But with all this up-in-your-face, hyper-violent, hypersexuality stuff, how do you hide it? Well, you use the Thin White Duke from David Bowie to hide all of it. Now, to get the quick summary across of who the Duke is that this is a persona made by David Bowie who is, looks-wise, a normal guy. However, once you remove that mask, you end up realizing the Thin White Duke is fucking crazy. Coming from David Bowie himself, the persona is described as a mad aristocrat, a moral zombie, or an emotionless Aryan Superman, with the full idea being a very Aryan fascist type character and a would-be romantic who has no emotions at all, sprouting the ideas of neo-romance, among other controversies with his time as this persona. So to put it simply, a fucking weirdo, just like Yoshikage Kira. So when you put Josuke up against Kira, there is a clear clash of character versus character, theme versus theme, music versus music. A person that represents protection, love, showing yourself off to the world in your most authentic self, versus a masochist, a murderer, and a liar at the surface level, and once looked inward is even worse than the surface. With maybe even a deeper social critique of glam rock and how it can kind of ruin you, looking at Freddie Mercury and later on David Bowie, compared to Pink Floyd, who kind of went around the whole hard drug thing during their peak as a band, thanks to Syd Barrett. Very poetic, if true, and I do think it is to at least some degree. So Kira and Josuke show us, the audience, that you kind of do need to look more into these characters and what they overall mean and symbolize past the story itself. about said music or how a author interprets that music and transforms it for his own medium. And on the other case, it might be literally required, as you might gain things from the initial art itself. However, there are things that maybe the author took out for one reason or another, in a way requiring you to even push forward once engaging with the media past the surface level of the story initially. Read author interviews. Trust me, it makes the story a hell of a lot better. And for the most part, I think you can kind of get the idea here. Whether you use references to give you an idea to eventually refine and build a character, or make the reference itself a whole character, elevating the story to a much higher degree because of it once you know about it. However, there is one step above this. Instead of inspiration or character crafting, what about the whole plot? What if the whole plot of an entire movie, show, manga, anime is a bunch of clashing references against each other? I present to you Part 5, Golden Wind. Now, for the most part, on a first watch or reread, you will kind of get the idea that Part 5 is about change and how there is never an everlasting climax to life. There is ebbs and flows, and you cannot control them. However, you can do your best to make the most out of life before death. And the best way to do that is through change. Being stuck in one position like Diavolo, even if it's a climax, isn't good. All of this can be seen through Giorno's reference through Prince's song Gold, which would later inspire Gold Experience. However though, if you just slightly tweak it a little bit and see it a bit differently and move from one character to another, the story changes pretty dramatically, if not becomes very heavily multi-layered. And the character I'm talking about here is Risotto Nero. Now this is going to get pretty complex pretty fast because we're going to have to talk about a lot of musical references here. So just like how I figured it out, I will explain it to you guys. Because I want to love and appreciate my favorite franchise a bit more, I look up everybody's musical reference and try to understand where Araki's coming from or is trying to elaborate with his characters. So for the longest time, I thought Metallica's song Master of Puppets was the reference Araki was using for Risotto. However though, I think I'm actually wrong here. Instead of Metallica The Stand being a reference to Master of Puppets, I think it's actually referencing Until It Sleeps, because the song has a better direct correlation with the stand itself and what Risotto feels like, as destiny, fate, or reality has been taken by somebody else, which he has no control over, that person being Diavolo, or alternatively, his haunting backstory previous to Part 5, or maybe both, probably both. But because of that, it made me ponder, does Master of Puppets fit back into Part 5 in any other way? Because, of course, that we know previously, with other characters, said character could have multiple different song references simultaneously. Then I had a stroke of genius. Master of Puppets isn't a reference to Risotto, it's a reference to his whole team, all of La Squadra, but not just La Squadra, all of Passion. Master of Puppets is a two-sided song, with the first half being Puppet Master talking about how he has control over his puppets, while the second half of the other part of the song is about how the puppets are going to rebel against the master, wanting the strings to be removed from their bodies. Metaphorically speaking, both La Squadra and Bruno's group literally do this, and that's for good reason. In La Squadra's case, they are paid terribly for what they do. They're not drug runners, they're not bodyguards, they are contracted killers who are forced to live in the slums because Diavolo doesn't pay them for what they are worth and for what they are doing. Bruno's group rebels because he's a shitty leader and a terrible man, because he wants to kill the innocent life that is Trish Una. Keep that in mind, we're going to come back to that later. And of course, selling drugs on the streets of Italy. To emphasize this control even more so, what does Risotto look like to you? A black jester. And where are jesters usually found? If you said a court of a specific king, I think you'd be onto something. Enter the album by King Crimson in the Court of the Crimson King. Now, unlike previous musical references within JoJo's, this whole album is used in one go, and I mean that seriously, in one way or another. For the most part, the main villain of Part 5, Diavolo, has 3 references in this album, those references being 21st Century Schizoid Man, Epitaph, and half of the Court of the Crimson King, with his stand's name being a reference to the overall band itself. Schizoid Man is a reference to Diavolo's mental state, as it's not all there and he has clear problems. Epitaph, of course, is a reference to Diavolo's obsession with the future and trying to keep an everlasting climax, while Court of the Crimson King refers to Diavolo's position and authority over Passion itself, with no signs of any change ever occurring because Diavolo wants to keep the status quo, it being so old that it's referred to as ancient. Just looking at these three references alone, clashing against Metallica and Master of Puppets, you can clearly see there is an underlying theme of class rebellion happening in at least a multitude of different ways, represented through La Squadra and Bruno's group. But it doesn't stop there. Looking at the song Moonchild in Court of the Crimson King reveals that Trish Una is not only a Spice Girls reference, but a King Crimson reference as well. Of course, being the daughter of Diavolo, this of course would make sense. In the song itself, the Moonchild is kept away in the darkness, waiting for the daytime to show up eventually, wandering and biding her time in the darkness. Change can only occur when the Sun Child appears. This parallels Trish and Giorno through how the fact that Trish has to leave a secret of life for at least the majority of part 5 because Diavolo is trying to kill her, and by the end of part 5 is saved by Giorno, whose name literally translates to day, with the last song in the Court of the Crimson King being I Talk to the Wind. Now, this one was a little bit hard to pinpoint, but I do think I understand it to a certain degree in the concept of part 5 and where Araki was going with it. This song is about observing something from the outside and observing the things around you, metaphorically talking to the wind here. Of course, this is all one giant reference to Giorno's character, as Giorno observes Italy and sees a problem with it, that problem being in direct correlation with the current runnings of Passion and Diavolo. We can go even deeper through this because Giorno has been living a gangster life or a gangster adjacent life for the entirety of his life. However, though, nobody has heard his pleas until the late man, aka Bruno, hears him out, which leads to the metaphorical or the literal change in the song and in the part to occur, which brings us back to Giorno and Prince's song Gold, a song about breaking the mold and looking at the world a lot differently than the status quo. Even more so, the song talks about helping the people around you, which Giorno does. So if you've ever wondered why Giorno is a stagnant character, this is the reason why. His only purpose is to break the mold. He is the challenger to the status quo. He's here to help everybody. And while yes, La Squadra does die, La Squadra, more likely than not, would have just kept the status quo from what we can actually gather, just swapping themselves out for Diavolo for themselves, while Giorno actually provides real change. So when you take a step back and look at this clash of albums reference-wise, you end up seeing a story about change, breaking the mold, making life better for the people around you, but also a story about class warfare and what the status quo can actually do to people if used for evil like Diavolo did. After figuring that out, I argue to myself, do I like part 5 more than I like part 7? I don't know. Gangster Class Rebellion or Dante's Inferno with cowboys? I can't decide, honestly. Reaching the end of the video, I hope you guys actually come to enjoy the musical references that Araki tries to put into his manga. Not only for making characters and stands, but whole plot lines, for his ode to humanity and what it represents, showing the good and evil and the weird in-betweens with humanity. And I hope you appreciate the references other artists put into their own work and medium because it does matter. A lot of these authors do intend for deeper, significant plot meanings while referencing their own favorite media or inspirations. That being said, like, comment, share, subscribe, follow me over on Patreon if you want to consider supporting me. Stay hydrated, and I'll see you in the next one, ladies and gentlemen. Deuces.